everyone. Hi, I'm Rachel Yager, head of WebInnovationX Global Think Tank and W3C New York Metro Chapter. Welcome to EdTech X Innovation Week Tuesday Startup Forum. This Startup Forum is where the W3C New York Metro Chapter engages startups in developing business model, human capital, new applications, technologies, and service platforms. I'm excited today to first introduce you to our speaker for this forum, Kaleeg Hainsworth, CEO of Legible.com. Today is October 5th, 2021. We are almost 2 years into the pandemic. I asked Kaleeg about the keys to the future for his startup venture that started on February 2020. And as we look back and march forward to the future, how he's recovering, how we are recovering, and what are the keys to the future. I invite Kaleeg to first present how Legible is changing the book experience for everyone, followed by Q&A, including the market strategy for Legible. And for the audience, you can key in the questions in the chat and the Q&A in the Attendee Hub website. Later is my tete-a-tete chat with Kaleeg about personal, professional, and also business transformation, transition, and talent management. So a lot of learning points, very exciting. So stay tuned to the very end of this 1 hour with us. So now I'm going to turn over to Kaleeg Hainsworth. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm very honored and privileged to be here. I'm very excited to talk today about education and technology, and not just education and technology, but my own and my own company's particular approach to it, and also who we are. I have no actual interest in trying to sell anything or sell my company or anything. I'm just going to talk about us. I'm just going to talk about our approach, but more specifically, I'd like to talk and start talking a bit about educational technology. Education itself is primal to the human being. We have been sharing stories as animals for as long as we have lived in communities. And it's one of the defining aspects of what it is to actually be a human being, is to share stories, whether it's stories of what danger lies in the mountains ahead, whether it's stories about our own personal experiences in the world that we live in, which can be a very traumatic and difficult and challenging place in every way, whether it's stories to just teach us about how to live in this world and about how to thrive in this world. We've been sharing stories and educating each other for as long as we've lived in community. And I'll come back to the concept of community and why that's so important to education in a little while. But essentially, education itself is more than just sharing stories with each other. That is learning. Learning is one thing, but education is actually something altogether more than that. Education involves taking a body of knowledge and being able to convey it to other people, either 1 or 10 or 100 people, being able to transfer that knowledge from generation to generation. And so human beings traditionally have found one specific and critical way of conveying that information from one generation to another, or from one person to another, and that has been writing. Now, writing is, and the writing of books specifically, is something that is actually not that old in history and in human history. As a matter of fact, writing is something that we can actually trace back to about 7,000 or 8,000 years ago in Mesopotamia, at least in Western cultures or in traditional histories. With the Sumerians, as they in Mesopotamia, they had an abundance of clay. They had an opportunity to use cuneiform ways of being able to express knowledge. And so there's really three major ways in which we've had what's called a carrier change in how we communicate knowledge from one generation, how we educate people, the technology that we educate. And the first carrier change came from the telling of stories to the writing down of those stories in Mesopotamia, Sumerian languages. So for instance, Gilgamesh is an example of an ancient Sumerian story that we only know about because it was written down in cuneiform manner. But then later on, we began to use papyrus and vellum and scrolls to be able to write down and pass knowledge from one group to another. And in those times, of course, being able to have a papyrus or a scroll or even a vellum book as the centuries went on was actually a luxury that not everybody could enjoy or have. And so these documents for education were contained within communities of people. And here I want to just share the centrality of community in education, and also different kinds of ways of speaking. We tend to put an emphasis on the written form. We tend, at least in Western cultures, in many Western cultures, see the written form as the absolute form. But in truth, indigenous cultures, which have been advanced civilizations for 15, 20, 25,000 continuous years, have communicated education and stories and learning through the voice, and specifically through dance and through other equally valid ways of communicating knowledge through the centuries. It's just that one particular group of human beings have always sort of dominated that specific idea of having to write as being the source of knowledge. But it's actually not. Writing is an inaccurate source of knowledge, as a matter of fact, comparative even to storytelling, but that's a whole other discussion, I think. In any case, the vellum and the paper and the papyrus, the ability to write things down in a more accessible format, was another carrier change in the history of education technology. And of course, the third main carrier change in how we communicate, how we write things down, came in the form of Gutenberg and his printing press, which transformed everything, because now suddenly everybody was able to have the books that only communities could have. And so every home was able to have certain precious books. And as the printing press, as printing technology continued to advance, more and more people were able to have books, until just this last century, just about anybody could get in their vehicle and go to a local bookstore and pick up a book for themselves, which they would be able to have in their own home. And then you have the rise of bookshelves and IKEA, and the rest is history. In any case, there is a fourth, we believe at Legible, major carrier change in how human beings communicate knowledge. And we think that it's the reading system, the digital book reading system. Now, I have been in digital publishing. I've been making ebooks for over 25 years, since 1996. When I was writing my thesis, my undergraduate honors thesis, in fact, on Gerard Manley Hopkins and the poetics of beauty. And I wanted to make it into a portable web publication, or into a document that could be transferred, that I could use the web in, that I could actually have deep linking in. And that was really the beginning of my journey into the world of the reading system itself. But at Legible, I'm just one person in a very vibrant, passionate community of people who believe, perhaps oddly, in the power of the reading system to transform and change the world. And we see four specific ways that the reading system actually can change the world. Well, nobody, I like to say, can change the world. Even the president of the United States can't change the world. That's something that they discover the moment that they become president. But we can make meaningful change in the world. Just because we can't do everything doesn't mean we can't do something. And for us, that something is tirelessly working to find to perfect a reading system that can do four specific things. We think the power of the modern digital reading system for educational technology comes in four specific values. One is accessibility. So we think that the reading system should be accessible. And the original purpose of the digital book was to be a portable web published document, meaning you have the internet and you have a document which was made for, in fact, ideally suited for that distribution of knowledge, which we called web or the World Wide Web, the internet. And we think that a properly tuned browser-based reading system allows people to access any book anywhere using any browser on any device at any time, instead of everything being siloed into single-use digital reading devices. We already have devices. We don't need more devices, and the world can't sustain more devices, which I'll come back to in a minute. So in any case, having a reading system which brings in accessibility to everybody allows us to access communities, cultures, histories, and to platform them in a platform that anybody in the world can actually join in and access that content and learn from that content. And now is the time for that to happen. We absolutely, in a post-pandemic, almost, hopefully, in a post-pandemic climate-challenged world, we absolutely need technology that will promote education, not just from those cultures and societies that have been privileged thus far in being able to have all their content continuously available, mostly to themselves and anybody else that can get access to it somehow, but to have that content from cultures and communities that are far-flung, that have histories and insights and knowledges that we all need in this world. We know that it is a good for the world to have more people and more information shared from all of these cultures. The indigenous cultures, for instance, of North America are an example. Indigenous cultures here have over 15,000 years of knowledge about how to live here, not just how to live here, but their own histories, their own epics, their own stories, and their own education to pass on. We need that knowledge as human beings across the planet as we're facing an increasingly complex and challenged world as we go forward. So being able to have an accessible reading system that allows indigenous cultures, both locally or allows cultures or people or villages or towns anywhere in the world that happen to have access to the internet already, to be able to put their own stories in various ways on it. That's what our golden goal is to make a reading system that is truly frictionlessly accessible to anyone with any browser anywhere in the world. But we also think, for a second value in terms of educational technology, that a reading system has an opportunity in this case, at this time, to be profoundly sustainable. Because the thing is, a reading system rooted in a browser means that it will travel and innovate along with the internet itself. Anytime anybody wants to access a browser, someone else, we need to be able to, that reading system will evolve with browsers as browsers evolve in our devices. So in that sense, it is profoundly sustainable, but in a direct way, it is also sustainable in the sense that we do not have the opportunity anymore to continue to mine the earth for resources for single-use reading devices, which only a privileged few in a certain socioeconomic bracket can access in order to access books. That is an idea that came in the middle 2000s. I watched it happen. It kind of cut the legs right out of portable web publishing and put it directly into siloed devices. It doesn't have to be that way, and it isn't anymore. So the reality is that we can get rid of the waste, honestly, the industrial waste, both of the resources that are mined out of the earth with children's hands in the Congo, for instance, shipped and packaged and built and then put into every store in Western countries, and then unpacked by people who can afford it. And then what is the life cycle of those devices? I know many people that have single-use devices that have like 5 of them just sitting and collecting dust in their cupboards or in their rooms. The fact is, we cannot, from an environmental perspective, continue to think that that is reasonable. We already have devices. Just as we wouldn't necessarily look back on pagers and wish we had those, we don't, because we don't need them. We already have the devices that can provide the same function. Everybody has a smartphone. There are 650 million people with smartphones in the African continent. Not one of them necessarily has the opportunity to go and get a single-use reading device, or not many of them, I should say. But the fact is, they all can have access to reading through their browser, as they should and should have always had. And so we're restoring the purpose of the ebook, as it were, in terms of it being universal and accessible to everyone, including on phones in mobile-first environment. People should have a beautiful experience of reading. And that brings me to a third point, and that is beauty. Beauty is very, very important part of human life. It's who we are, and it's what drives us. All of us are ennobled by beauty. Beauty is something that belongs to everybody and to no one at once. Beauty is something that makes us holy, but we don't need to be holy to actually encounter it. Beauty is something that dignifies and ennobles human beings. And whether we're poor or we're rich alike, it doesn't matter. Beauty belongs to all of us. We see beauty in each other. We see beauty in our world around us, and it roots us. Some of the most powerful experiences of beauty happen for people in the midst of tremendous and powerful suffering. Viktor Frankl, for instance, in his book, golly, I can't remember the title of his book at the moment, but Viktor Frankl, in his book on logotherapy, based on his experiences as a Holocaust concentration camp survivor, talks about being in the midst of tremendous suffering in the rain and the cold outside. And he looked up and sees a bird with a beautiful sunset behind it. And he realizes that there is hope beyond his suffering. So beauty can lift us outside of suffering just as much as it can relieve it as well, just as much as it can inspire us. So we really think that that beauty should be part of the reading experience as well. There is no reason why a book that has been designed beautifully by its author in conception and in its writing, in the layout artist and the publisher that puts time into how it looks and how it presents, based, let's be honest, on thousands of years of design thinking about how books and how information should be conveyed on a page, only to have that beauty and that nobility of that book completely ruined when it gets onto a reading system, to have all of its formatting stripped out or stripped right down to its core, and just for its basics to be presented as if the book doesn't have any purpose as a digital book, as if the book itself as a digital book is secondary to the original. And of course, for educational publishers, this is a trying problem, because the book itself the printed book, the physical book, becomes the primary object, the primary book, because you cannot convey the amount of media or the amount of formatting or the kind of images or anything in the actual book into the digital environment in any meaningful way. Well, we think that that is not only solvable, but we solved it, because educational publishers should be relying, we believe, on the digital book because of how far it can get. Remember, the access point is critical. It has to be accessible. So if you can present a book beautifully, it means that educational books, textbooks can be distributed globally to anybody with a browser on their phone, for instance, can be diving into educational books. And then similarly, books that are highly formatted, that have images and so on, are opportunities for people. these kinds of books should be displayed and rendered beautifully in the browser. People should have an engaged experience, and there is no reason anymore using modern web services. And I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. For instance, I'll share my screen. I'm just going to go right now, actually, to Legible. I'll jump in here, and then I'm going to log in. And then I'm going to search for a book that I've written, actually. And just to show how easy it is to access that book, that was just one click now that I'm in it. And here we have an example of what's possible for a book to be able to, and you can see that it is fully responsive. And I can just turn the page. And then this is just a basic ebook format. Anybody with any experience in making ebooks can make exactly this book and all that is involved in it. And there's various ways that a person can dive into it and can make that and can find that experience. Just as you're turning the page, you can suddenly see a bird, for instance, flying out from behind. This is just an image, video behind the book. You can just see a bird flying out. And then, I can skip all the way to the end, and you can see the author walking across the page here. This one's taking a little bit longer to load because of my internet. Maybe I'll do this. And here, there you go. You can see the author walking literally across the page. And of course, this is a book that is fully responsive as well as it well should be. So if I'm in phone format or in any other format, it's fully responsive as it goes forward, and it displays the book exactly as it should be. And that's really what Legible is trying to do when it comes to beauty and when it comes to its work in trying to make books accessible for publishers and give new opportunities for people to provide educational content. Imagine now that you can provide videos integrated fully with audio in creative ways using an entire screen, for instance. The list goes on and on in terms of what we can actually do. And when we restore beauty to the actual book itself, and give that opportunity to the authors and the publishers to be able to do anything that they need to do using modern browser code bases, because anything you can do in a code base on a browser, you can do in a code base on in Legible's reading system, or in a browser-based reading system, of course, because it's leveraging the code bases of the browser already. But if we can restore that kind of beautiful experience, we know that we can restore a sense of a digital book to be as powerful and as immediately accessible as a print book can be. In fact, more accessible in parts of the world where you can't ship books and where we shouldn't necessarily ship books. And one point about sustainability, which I think is critical, we have to understand, and this isn't something I believe is just like a fact of life, that we need to decarbonize in our world. We have like 7 or 8 years to decarbonize every system, human system on Earth. I have a climate change background, so I kind of think about these things a lot. And in the publishing industry, the education industry as well, that is just as much of an imperative. It's not just big oil. We have to save our oil for things that we really need. We have to save our resources for things we really need. It's not just about putting carbon in the atmosphere. It's also about there being a finite number of resources on a finite planet. That's just math and logic. So if that's what we're going to do, we need to make sure that we are looking at a publishing industry which is also decarbonizing. And currently, we have masses of trees being cut down every year for our books. Then we have all of the chemicals that go into pulping those trees and preparing them as paper. Then we have all the bindery practices. Then we ship those books all over the world using petrol everywhere in the world, to stores and to places and to warehouses where people have to get in more vehicles to go and pick them up and get those, just so they can have one single book in their house or a collection of books in their classroom. And this is highly problematic and cannot continue. We need to find other ways, and restoring the beauty of a digital book, I mean, that's an easy win for us. In fact, we did the calculations at Legible, and if we can eliminate single-use reading devices from use, we'll eliminate, and as well as cut down on paper usage and trees that we also need for carbon. We're going to have a profound impact on the global carbon budget, and almost the publishing industry can take down almost 1% off the global carbon budget by shifting to a browser-based reading system. And that in and of itself, I think, is worth fighting for at this time in the world. But the last thing that I'll suggest is integrity as our last sort of guiding value, and why we see the power of a reading system rooted in the browser as being the future of digital publishing and changing reading for everyone. Integrity is critical to everything that we do, and integrity with our publishers, integrity with each other. Integrity essentially means community. I was once, I was talking to Dr. Rachel, and I was mentioning that I was in in northwestern Alaska a couple of years ago, making a documentary about climate change. And I was interviewing, I spent a month with the Yupik people in northwest Alaska. And I asked one of the elders there, I said, why do you call yourselves the Yupik? And Yupik means the real people. And I said, do you consider yourselves the real person? Like, am I not real? And are you real? Like, what does that mean? And the elder said, she said, no, she said, that's not what we mean. She said, for 15,000 years, the Yupik people have understood a human being as being in community with all other things and living things, not just other human beings, but the entire ecosystem that we live in. We are animals that live with animals in a large ecosystem that we all share and depend on together to live. That's just how nature works. And so we cannot escape the fact that as human beings, we live in community. And because we live in community, we need to live in integrity within that community. And so for us, the power of the reading system, giving frictionless access and educational tools globally to anybody, anywhere with a browser on their phone or their computer or whatever, means that we can be responsible servants of those communities. Legible does not consider itself a company. We consider ourselves a community that is impacting, that wants to impact and support meaningful change in other communities through the delivery device of an educational technology, through the delivery device of a globally accessible publishing and reading browser-based platform. That means that we can work with those communities and support them in their own educational modeling, support them not just in how information comes to them, but with integrity within the large global community of which we are a part now, that we can actually take that, that we can actually ensure that their own knowledge, that their own histories and their own insights are able to be published and accessible by anybody else in the world that may need that. So our dream is for a farmer in Northwest India to be working with, to be sharing books and creating a bookshelf with other farmers, say in Western Canada or Central United States or Southern Brazil, for instance, about seeds that work really well in drought-stricken conditions as we try to make ourselves resilient in the face of climate change. Or sharing the stories of their people, inspiring other artists around the world to learn new crafts. And so we see diversity within community as essential as well, and upholding the integrity of that diversity. So the reading system for us is so critical because as an educational technology, and we see the reading system in the browser as being the next great carrier change in human knowledge and education and learning and storytelling that we're facing. And we see that because it brings radical accessibility. It brings an opportunity to truly mean sustainable practices in a world where we don't have time to just talk about it anymore. We have to do something. And then thirdly, it gives us an opportunity to introduce what a book has always meant to be in a digital format, which is beautiful, not just accessible, but beautiful as well. But then also it allows us an opportunity to work with integrity within the larger human condition. You know, the thing about Legible is that we're not trying to dominate and destroy relentlessly. We are interested in seeing ourselves as part of an entire ecosystem, like a mother tree in a forest, sustaining other trees and being sustained by other trees. When one species in nature dominates and destroys relentlessly, it kills the ecosystem itself. That's not opinion. That's just nature. That's just the natural law of life. And therefore, we don't want to be, that is not how human beings or life or the planet that we live on work. And in that sense, we see ourselves as part of a larger community, a larger industry and ecosystem. Thank you.
I'd like to now have some questions on your presentation. I just want to start by emphasizing a point is that we did not invite any other startups in this forum because there is a lot from Kaleeg that he's sharing that I thought that is really inspiring about the passion, the vision you have. First, I just want to share the first question actually I'm going to put on the chat here is some of how you, the timeline from concept to the ideation phase and how you actually bring this reading system to actual deployment. Would you want to comment on that?
Sure, absolutely. You know, two things, two quotes here. First is a quote from Francis Bacon, I think, who said that knowledge maketh a bloody entrance. There is no way anything profoundly important or new, like a carrier change in how we read and convey knowledge, is ever going to be anything but disruptive. But we don't have a choice right now. As I said, we're decarbonizing. And the other quote is, the path of true love ne'er runs smooth, which is from Shakespeare. I think it's The Taming of the Shrew or something. And I have to say that it has been a bloody journey, and it has not been an easy one. In fact, the exact point that I remember thinking that we have to find a way to make reading systems accessible was when I was working as a priest in a homeless shelter, because and I built a homeless shelter with my own hands, actually, like physically, and many people were visiting that homeless shelter, and I realized that many of them were very, very bright and very hungry to learn and to study, and they had lots of time in this beautiful space that we created. And so I went and I got a whole bunch of books. This is in 2008 world. And I found some devices, some old devices, and I put the books in the devices and gave them out. And I saw the impact, Dr. Rachel, that it had on those human beings who were able to access all these books now, and I saw the impact of that. And I realized, aha, this times the rest of the world equals meaningful change. And so for 12 years, actually, I worked tirelessly, and not the only one. There's a handful of people, just a handful of people in the world that are also doing this work. And but it was 12 years of continuous coding, trying things out, seeing what would work, testing it out on books, testing it out on actual clients in my other business, which was a business that makes ebooks. I don't work for it anymore, and bootstrapping it until I could finally get to a point where, yeah, I could start the company. And so that's 12. So I would say, even though I've been making in digital publishing since 1996, I have been myopically focused on reading systems rooted in the browser for 12 years. It's taken me that long.
Interesting you use the word myopic, but it's the whole central point of what you see as in the future. And this device, not how to say, device-free type of environment, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and it happened.
Yeah.
It happened just incidentally. My dream came true already. As far as I'm concerned, I can retire now because we already did it. But and we're just getting started. But my dream came true a couple of weeks ago when my 14-year-old was in his first day of philosophy classes. And his professor said, okay, here's a list of the textbooks you'll need for the semester. And he opened up his little MacBook Air and put it up and then typed in Legible and then signed in. And then 30 seconds later was pulling books into his library that he could just start using. His teacher's jaw just dropped. And I thought, okay, I can retire now. That's good. That's exactly the point, right?
And thanks for just now the demonstration of that beautiful example. And we say that today it started off a bit gloomy, both in beautiful Vancouver, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, you know, the Big Apple, right?
And
it's a bit gloomy today, but and the image of the bird flying, you know, that's not beauty is in gloominess also, right? So that is nice, you know, a nice illustration of what the feeling is.
Just the beginning. We have about a dozen more actually that are coming along, full what we're calling multimedia book experiences, because now somebody can, for instance, can take a book and I'm not talking, they don't have to be any more skilled than they already are in the publishing industry to do what I just showed and much, much more. Anybody can now craft and dream creatively in any way they want to ideate around what their book is going to look like. We don't call them books anymore in Legible necessarily. We call them publications. A publication includes a print book, but is not only the print book. Now we know that now people can simply, they can design their books with graphic images and animations, and they can combine all of them in meaningful ways and just have them on the browser. And it's a simple upload of a basic EPUB. We're really trying to restore the source and the original purpose of ebooks, actually.
So I want to continue with a few mix of personal and also what you see as a strategy, and also how you want to build that vision of the community that you shared with us. So I want to come back to the notion of beauty, because this is also something I always thought about, right? So when I go to your website, I went almost immediately to the Book of Cheese. And because I was enticed by souffle, all right, because I love souffle. And it was very simply illustrated, and when I turn the page, I feel beautiful about it because I can immediately imagine me cooking that souffle. You know, I mean, like, you know, instead of waiting, you know, to go to a restaurant to do it, right? And so my question is about your design thinking in beauty. Do you see a difference? Beauty in the, you know, beauty is in the eyes of the beholder, and like in the academic setting and in business setting, and what is this notion about education, right? You know, education is now changing, and we are defining it. Everybody is trying to define that, right? I mean, in professional setting, in the school, how do you cater to that design thinking for publishing?
Well, you know, one of the things that I say all the time around Legible is listening is love in action. And if we listen to other people and to other industries, that's listen meaningfully, that's love. And we don't have time in the world anymore to do any, to live in any, we have to be hot or cold at this point in history. So we aim to be very loving and to listen to every one of our publishers and industry partners. So that means different things for different people. Education will be very, very differently defined and expressed in, say, Namibia than it would be in, say, British Columbia, Canada. Publishing needs will be different. Publishers and authors will need different kinds of technology and different kinds of approaches. And then that doesn't include literacy organizations such as the Room to Read Foundation or the International Literacy Foundation and others who are looking for ways to bring their content and to promote literacy in the world. So the way that we approach it, and we're just beginning, as a matter of fact, believe me, we're not even at a beta yet. Our next release is going to knock people's socks off. Guaranteed to be the most beautiful reading experience on the planet ever in digital format. So I would say we're trying to listen to what our publishers need. There's no one solution. The difference is that we're not going to publishers and educational institutions and saying, here's what we've done. It's our way or the highway. It's that dominate relentlessly and kind of approach that we don't take. We go to our publishers and educational partners and say, okay, what are your needs? What can we do to make your work better? Because we have an entire community that sees itself as working with other communities. So we want to work with those and are working with those communities to develop. So if a publisher comes and says, we have a specific need that we want to bring our educational materials to, I don't know, northeastern Canada, for instance, to Indigenous communities there or wherever. But we need language support in order to do it. Well, we're not above, because we already started and already do this, sitting down and ideating with them and actually working with them directly to make sure that they can do that and to make sure that they can actually have that educational innovation in our reading system to be able to access and do their work in those other communities. So there's no one answer to that question. It really is, it comes out of dialoguing with, and not just dialoguing with, but collaborating with. You know, I once heard this definition of really healthy relationships, I should say. Not all relationships are healthy, many aren't. But healthy relationships in love are like people, they're like co-conspirators, which I always loved that definition of a love relationship. And in a way, we see ourselves as that with the publishing and educational industry is saying, hey, we're a co-conspirator with you. We know, because all of us at Legible are all like publishers and authors. I think there, okay, so there are 7 people in the C-suite at Legible. 6 out of those 7 people in Legible's C-suite have written books. Our chief technical officer wrote 12 books. Our chief operating officer has written 4 books. So we are passionate authors and publishers, and we want to listen to and work with the other publishers as well. And we see ourselves as collaborative towards a better future. That's the only approach that we see as having any meaning in the 21st century going forward. We don't have time for the other nonsense.
Yeah, well said. There's a question, and it's about it's along the line about deployment. How would you provide guidelines and educational material for authors, and how to produce this responsive and interactive books, right? So if tomorrow I want to come to Legible and I want to publish my book, all right?
Yeah.
Okay, how would you educate?
Yeah, that's right, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, so accessibility is the other part. So I said that we're a global publishing and reading platform. We've been talking about the reading and the accessibility about mostly, but I have 12 years of experience in making ebooks for publishers and independent authors globally. So there's a really big part of, there's a lot of real estate in my own heart for publishers and independent authors, and for their ebooks and how to get them onto platforms in a way that isn't demoralizing fundamentally once you see it on that platform, at least being read, and isn't despairing in the form of a Byzantine approach. So we created a frictionless access publishing side of Legible. It's the other half of Legible's brain, in fact. And we're actually releasing that this year. And it will allow people, and you can go to legible.com and find the publisher link and sign up for early access to it. But it will allow the following, actually, and this makes my heart swell 5 times bigger than it already is when I think about it, because a lot of this love is actually love for authors and publishers, especially small publishers and independent authors. We made it so that it was frictionless, that you could publish from your phone, that you could write your ebook directly in the actual and fully design it with all the multimedia experience that you want directly within the actual publisher itself, and then to put your book onto Legible in one or all or any combination of 4 revenue streams for your title, whether that be purchasing or rental or ad-supported reading or subscription. Everybody is can choose all 4 for one book, or just one for one book. They can do whatever they want there. And we made it so frictionless because there's actually there was some of the inspiration for this came from a story I heard about the author of a book that I think is called My Brother the Mountain. It won an Australian prize. I can't remember I think that's the title. In any case, this was an individual who was detained by a journalist, I think an Iranian journalist that was detained by the Australian government for no reason whatsoever and put in a concentration camp of sorts, or a detainment camp, and was kept there under the most inhumane conditions imaginable on the planet at the moment, which is saying something. So, and he smuggled a phone into this Australian detention camp, and in the process was able to tweet out his entire book on being there, which was a combination of poetry and images and much more. It's filled with beauty. In a way, it reminds me a lot of the Gulag Archipelago by Solzhenitsyn, who incidentally pointed out that beauty will save the world. I forgot to mention that. But in any case, he tweeted out this book, and I remember thinking how awful that he didn't have a platform that he could open up his little smuggled in smartphone and actually write and compose and design the book itself, and then publish it directly so that the entire world, not just people with single-use reading devices or a special, credit card, can access it. And so that was a big inspiration on why we wanted to make the publishing system for Legible for people around the world not only accessible, but mobile first, as a matter of fact. And so we put great pains into doing that, because believe me, all these things I'm talking about, they're not like snap your fingers, it's easy to do. It takes a fair amount of personal sacrifice and discipline and community discipline within Legible to actually ideate past what's easiest.
So let me ask you about a personal question about how you move. So your bio is one of the most interesting, right? It's all there's so many elements of your journey. Name a few: ecologist, the priest to begin with, and then film, right? Directing films, and then media. Being in the media industry, and now turning into this ebook, and also in the future, and we are seeing the trends of audiobooks, multimedia, and as you have illustrated just now in your demonstration, this visual effect or the videos, right? Multimedia settings. So how do you transition yourself, like how do you put bring yourself to transition in this each of these phases?
Huh. Yeah. You know, I don't think life is, I don't bifurcate life, my life. It's all one whole cloth. Um, you know, I mentioned in 1996, I was writing a thesis on Gerard Manley Hopkins, the great 19th century English poet. And I think probably the proto-spiritual ecologist, actually, and beauty, while at the same time trying to make it into a digital book, all at the same time. And so those elements were there even as long ago as 25 or 26 years ago, or however many years ago that was now. And I don't think that there's ever been a time in my life where I've been one thing and not another. So when I was a professor of ecology, I was also a priest, and I was also running at the time a digital book company, and also raising 3 kids as a single dad, and then teaching, and then as well teaching backcountry education during the weekends. So I've always done things at the same time. I guess I have a mind that is continuously operating and trying to do whatever I can actually for the people around me. Being a priest, which I am, retired, by the way, I don't operate that as more, but it gave me an opportunity, and that is, you know, my priesthood is something that I served with integrity and served others, and I actually consider the work that I'm doing now as the CEO of Legible, a global publishing and reading company, giving access to billions of people to millions of books, as actually an ongoing, continuous ongoing vocation in my life. My vocation in life has always been to inspire people with poetry and language and words, to help people in who they are and where they are without judgment, and to bring beauty in wherever I possibly can, to support others in rich communities and try to make the earth a better place going forward. And so all those elements kind of all together amounted to what I'm doing now, which I really think is the culmination of my life, and really pulls together all these strains that I've been, you know, like a honeybee all my life. I've been finding all the nectar and all the flowers and all the fields that I can possibly get to. And in doing that, I think that Legible and all the work that we have done in Legible during the pandemic, I might add, and all the work that we're about to release, which is really quite exciting. I wish I could show you, but you'll just have to wait about 2 weeks. And boy,
I can always invite
everything
you.
changes in 2 weeks. And we come out of beta, let's put it that way. And so, you know, it all amounts to this work that I'm doing, and it's meaningful. We really do actually, this is very real for us. It's not just some sort of startup business thing where we're kids with an app or whatever. We mean business in what we do, and we mean to change the world through our reading system, and not because we want to be the economic powerhouse or whatever, but as I said, because we need to do business differently than we've done it. That, I think, is obvious. If you don't think that we need to do business differently, then, well, I don't know. I mean, we can still talk, but we should talk about the weather probably, because the fact is it's abundantly obvious. We have to do it differently. And the way I see it, anyways, at least the way we're doing it, is the way nature does it, which is finding our place within a larger ecosystem, that we can nourish and be nourished by it, and continue to develop and support all of its diversity within. That's just nature. That's not philosophy. That's not, you know, religion. That's nothing. It's just nature.
Kaleeg, you started the company on February 2020,
Yeah.
right? I think that's about the time when I
Yeah.
got all the news about the pandemic.
Yeah, I
Right?
know.
That's
I
not
know.
America, right?
Yeah.
and I was researching what masks to buy, and while you started your company, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
how do you how do you
Yeah.
feel at that moment when all this news? What's your sentiment about this whole period? You know, do you?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, we started everything in February. I think there were 8 of us at the time. There's over 70 of us now. So we've grown a lot during the pandemic. And you know, things sort of started happening for us. It was the first lockdown happened on March 17th. And like everybody, it was completely surreal experience for all of us. And definitely a lot of adjustments. We went between thinking, okay, well, this is what the apocalypse looks like, that we've all been watching TV in preparation for. You know, all kinds of thoughts came into one's mind at the time, honestly, and all kinds of revelation and truth as well, I want to add. I think all of us witnessed truth about the world and the world we live in and our part in it in ways that we haven't quite articulated yet. Nothing is the same anymore now. And we all know it, but we just don't know quite how yet. In any case, that began happening. And as we went into it, we suddenly found ourselves blinking at each other through our screens, such as you and I are at now. And we realized that whatever we were doing before, we now had renewed purpose, because the pandemic meant that people couldn't get into classrooms, they couldn't get into bookstores, they couldn't get into anywhere where they could access books. And we realized, oh, now it's merciful to actually, our work is more than just about access, it's merciful. Because for 2 things were shown. First, people realized they couldn't get out to get their books anymore. And secondly, it sort of showed what the rest of the world is fighting with. You know, 7 billion people on the planet struggle to get access to a single book. So for them, it's always been a pandemic. And so we realized with renewed purpose that actually a browser-based reading system and platform that was filled with social sharing and the ability to co-create books and annotate together with other people, all of these amazing things, that's what people should be doing already. And we realized that actually now we have renewed purpose, and we dove deeper. And indeed, over the last year, have gone from 8 people to 70 people, and honestly, we are just getting started. And we see every month we see renewed purpose. So here's the thing that we also did as well. And this might call me crazy, call us all crazy, but it's what we did. We'll see what happens, you know. But when we incorporated in February 2020 as Legible.com, we also established a foundation, the Legible Foundation. And because we thought, okay, we're going to develop a global business. We know our destiny. Believe me, at Legible, we know what our destiny is. We know that we're going to be the internet for books. We already know that. But what are we going to do as a corporate person? Because the struggle I always had personally was with the concept that corporations were treated as persons under law, and we're not going to be able to change that for the foreseeable future. So that means we should be the kind of person that is a responsible community member of the global community. And so to do that, we established a foundation before we even had a company. So that from the very beginning, as part of our genetic DNA, that we would be able to take our profits and put it into our foundation, and for that foundation to be the right hand of our left hand out in the world, doing the work within the communities that need it most. And then we developed an entire understanding of literacy, what we call Literacy Plus. And Literacy Plus really talks about much more than the ability for people to read and to write, but actually the impacts on human communities when girls and women, for instance, are educated and are able to do commerce and business and work and reading and publishing. What are the knock-on effects of that? Well, we call that literacy plus, and that's what we're working on. So from the beginning, we've been developing a foundation that has a foundation to support the foundations of the world.
Okay, I got a question. That's great. I really inspired by that model. Intriguing. All right. What advice would you give to someone starting a startup company to achieve success? What advice would you give to a startup?
Never give up and own your space. Own who you are. Find out who you are and what makes you do it and why you're doing it, and make sure your heart is in line with it. And then just don't give up. Just every obstacle imaginable will come into your way. Whether you just can't even imagine the kind of challenges that show up when you try to do anything meaningful in the world. And to acknowledge right from the beginning, before, like just as you're starting to sit down, writing your first pitch deck or whatever it is that you're doing, acknowledge that you will face every challenge that you can face. And that's the way it should be. Like, you know, one of my old professors and mentors used to say, he's passed away now, sadly, but he used to say, if it's worth doing, it's worth doing poorly. And if it's worth doing regardless of what you faced along the path. And that's just the way of life. I think any good action in the world will be met with an equal and opposite amount of resistance. But the one thing that I would say is that if we're doing something good in the world, in our business, as a startup, and if you're not trying to do something good in the world, just, I don't know, I don't have advice for that person. But if you're trying to do something good in your startup and you see the value of your business and your own work, whatever that is in the world, you know, Teresa of Calcutta said, or her mentor told her, that your vocation can be found in the intersection of the world's greatest need let me get it right. Your vocation is found where the world's greatest need and your greatest joy meet. So if that's what you're doing, if that's what your work is, then you're going to have to be ambitious about it. The head of the United Nations Forum for Climate Change said that we should be unambiguously ambitious, because those in the world who seek to dominate and to destroy it in a relentless way are filled with ambition. And we have to have as much ambition. So we will face everything challenging imaginable in doing our work, but it will be, but we have to just keep going in the face of it all, because that's just the cost of doing business and doing something, making change in the world. And we have to be vulnerable to that challenge. We have to be open to finding new ways to do what we want to do, and new paths around the challenges or through them, but not giving up, I think, is one of the keys. I would say I'll probably about half an hour from now, I'll have about 10 more things that I would like to share. But I would say that's one thing. Absolutely. Yeah.
Don't worry, we will invite you back to talk more, so
Okay.
you can share more. I know that we already run over 4 minutes, and we're going to end soon. I just want to acknowledge the bold concept, you know, like how to be brave, you know, how much encouragement, you know, through this talk you give to someone who is thinking about starting the business, be it in various form of e-business, tech business, and everything is going that direction, right? You know, we are going into a blended world, a hybrid world.
That's right.
And how this and morph into reality and into the future.
Yeah.
And what I feel, I want to end this session by saying that it may be gloomy like this morning, and but I feel happiness when I talk about speaking with colleague, and I feel really encouragement at this moment
Thank
to
you,
think
Dr.
about the joy I'm going to achieve, the needs that I'm going to fulfill right in the future.
Yeah.
And thank you, colleague. I'm going to stop the streaming, and thank you
Sure.
for the audience for your time. But colleague, can you stay back a bit
Yeah.
in the session? And I'm going to
Absolutely.
stop the streaming. I'd say thank you to the audience, and have a great day for all of you who attended this session. Thank you.